Programming exercise number 10 we're looking at now. It says at the moment this routine is allowing letters to cause the program problems. Change this routine so that only numbers for start square and finish square may be entered. Now there are a couple of different ways that you could go about this, but I'm going to go about it using exception handling. Remember, for this to work you'll need to turn off your integrated debugger in Lazarus. So if you go to Tools, Options, find the one for the debugger, and make sure that you choose none from this drop down box. Okay. So remember, to check that an integer has been entered, we actually need to read it in as a string, which can seem counterintuitive, but it's because we can then try and put it through the function that converts the string to an integer, and if it's not a valid integer, then that conversion will fail, which gives us a safe way of failing rather than simply having the program crash, which is what it would do at the moment if you entered letters instead of an integer for the start square and finish square. In order for this to happen, I need some new variables. I need start string and finish string, because we're going to get the user to enter these values actually as a string. But we still need start square and finish square, because ultimately we're going to be working with start square and finish square as integers. Okay? That will become clear later on. So we're just have, as an interim measure, going to use these start strings and finish strings to read the values in first of all. I'm also going to need a Boolean variable, so I know if something has failed or not. And I'm going to use valid as a Boolean variable. And at the beginning of the routine, I'm going to assume that valid is true. So we have here this write statement, enter the coordinates of the square containing the piece to move. And then what we do at the moment is we read that straight in as an integer. Now remember, I said we're not going to do that now. We're going to read it in as that start string variable I've set up here. And if you were paying attention earlier, you would know that the reason I'm doing that is because I'm now going to try to convert that to an integer. So that word there, try, is really important. That's a big part of our exception handling. I'm going to write try. Now when I press try, it's going to write finally underneath, and I'm actually going to delete that and write accept. And here's what I wanted to try. I wanted to try setting start square, that integer where we do want the user's value really, ultimately. I'm going to try setting that to this value, strut it in. Remember, that's our built-in function that will convert strings to an integer. So I want to take this start string and run strut it int function on it, and then store the result in start square. That is my preferred outcome. That's what should happen in the majority of circumstances. If they enter an integer, then it can be converted correctly from this string into this integer, and then we can go forward as before. But there's the possibility that that won't work. There's a possibility that this will fail if we can't do the strut it int function, and we won't be able to do the strut it int function if they haven't entered something that can be turned into an integer. So if they enter something that can't be turned into an integer, then we need to give them an error message. Now you'll notice that that error message says that was not an integer, please try again. At the moment we haven't got any way of getting them to try again. So that's where a repeat loop comes in, because we are going to keep asking them until they enter something valid. Just a little hint here, if you are going back and adding in loops to code where you hadn't written it automatically and you need to indent a whole load of code, select it, edit, indent selection. So we can indent this within our repeat loop now. So I'm going to repeat until valid is true. But if what they've entered isn't a valid integer, then that valid is going to be set to false. So what's going to happen here is we're going to assume to start with that they're going to enter something reasonable. We're going to read in their entry as a string. We're going to try and convert that string to an integer. If it does, then we're good, because then we come out of this repeat loop. We say, is valid true? Yes it is, that's what it started off and we haven't changed it, so valid is true, and then we can move on to the rest of the routine. But if they don't enter a valid integer, then we'll do this except block of code. We'll tell them it wasn't an integer, please try again. We'll change valid to false, so when we end the repeat loop, valid will be false, and we'll have to go back around again and get them to enter something else until they get the message that they need to enter an integer. Okay. Of course, I've only done it here for start square. You will also need to do it for this process here, which is doing the finish square. But I'll leave you to work out how to do that. It's very, very similar. It's essentially the same thing. You're going to need a repeat loop. You can reuse this same valid Boolean variable. Run through the repeat loop. The only difference is that after you've said enter the coordinates of the square containing the piece to move to, then you'll be reading it in as the finish string, not the start string. And then in your try, you'll be trying finish square becomes stritter int of finish string, rather than start square and start string. Okay? But the rest of the code in the block will be exactly the same for reading in the finish square as it was for reading in the start square. So best of luck with that.